Just before Jesus died, he summoned all his remaining strength to cry out loudly for all to hear, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me?" It is not how one would have expected a prophet, a holy man, or still less, a Messiah to die. Jesus died abandoned by his God, the God he called Father, the God he had faithfully served up to this last moment of his life. God had to, of course, separate himself from the world's sin, hence Christ's separation from the Father at the cross. But nevertheless, this abandonment must have been painful for our Lord. In fact, if we think about the whole Passion narrative, we can see how this final God-forsakenness of Jesus caps a crescendo of abandonment that characterizes the last hours of Jesus. Already at the Last Supper, Jesus knows that one of his disciples is about to betray him and the others to desert him. In Gethsemane they do. Even Peter, who was adamant he would not, utterly disassociates himself from our Lord. Only the group of women are faithful to the end, and they are obliged to watch their Lord die, albeit at a distance. The Jewish authorities reject Jesus. The citizens of Jerusalem, to whom Pilate offers to release Jesus, disown him, even though some of them had cheered his arrival in Jerusalem only a few days before. But by the time the soldiers nail him to the cross, the deepest dimensions of Jesus' abandonment, the most terrible, his abandonment by God the Father, is obvious for all to see. The onlookers throw it in his face, laughing at him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let the Messiah come down from the cross. The subtext is, God has abandoned him. God has let this happen and is not intervening to save him. Jesus dies, utterly forsaken and alone. Yesterday, the daily coronavirus update reported that a record 938 deaths were reported in UK hospitals. As the coronavirus stalks victims around the world, one of its scariest aspects is how it seems to feed on our deepest fears and preys on our primal instincts, like the impulse to be close to our loved ones when they are suffering and near death. The majority of those who have died from COVID-19, sadly, have died alone. I read yesterday of a grieving daughter who said her mother's death was shatteringly devastating because she was unable to hold her hand. In a painful irony, the very thing we need in moments of fear and anxiety to be near to those whom we loved, could also kill us at the same time. Dying alone, who would want to do this? But Jesus seemed to know what was coming. Jesus knew what he was doing when he walked into the trap that resulted in his death. He knew that his death was God's will. To die, and to die this sort of death, was the culmination of his mission from his Father. He anguished over this in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he had to accept the fact that God would not deliver him. And when he prayed this terrible prayer, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Perhaps he was on the brink of despair, but his words are a stepping back from that brink. For God is still, for Jesus, my God. Even emphatically so, since he has chosen the words of a psalm that unusually repeat the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Even in his abandonment by God, Jesus continues to trust the Father whose will he is doing. God seemingly had abandoned him, but he had not abandoned God. Yet there is another side to the matter. but one that we'll only really appreciate if we do not play down the abandonment. Something in the horror of Christ's death leads to the centurion looking on to say, truly this man was God's son. Through the centurion's words, the gospel writers are telling us this is where we can most truly perceive that Christ is the Son of his Father. This is where we can most fully perceive his deity and love. This is where we find God, even if, like the centurion, we hardly know anything else of God. When Jesus entered the darkness of his abandonment, he knew that this act would break the sting and power of both sin and death. Jesus went there, impelled by God's love, to bring God's love and forgiveness to the unloved. His cross is God's own act of loving and solidarity with all who seemingly die alone. This is why we recognize God more truly in the cross than anywhere else. Jesus' terrible abandonment by God makes us face up to the amazing love of God and to realize that, even in the darkest of places, God's life-giving love can and does reach even there. Amen.